It's the dead of winter, and you're watching 5 after midnight. May God have mercy on your soul. Number 1.
I was playing with my daughter, just like every other day. She suddenly told me that she needed to have a bathroom break. She goes to the washroom, and when she comes out, she says, "Who was that?" I was puzzled and asked what she was talking about. She said, "Someone kept telling me to be careful of the 10 and 35. I live in an apartment building, and it is possible to hear people in the hallway walking by. This wasn't the case because I would have heard this over my small child who was further away and behind a bathroom door. She asked me again, "What does that mean? Why are they telling me to be careful of the 10 and 35? I quickly told her that she must have heard someone in the hallway, but she didn't believe it. She said she heard it in the bathroom, and that's what they were telling her. I'm left wondering what all of this means. A time? A date? 10:35 a.m.? 10:34 p.m.? October 2035? Only time will tell. My daughter is 4 years old."
Number 2.
When I was a kid, my family owned a farm, and one day when I was 12, I had a friend over. My dad asked me to go to the barn for my daily chores while she was still there. It was an old-fashioned barn with a stone foundation, and the upstairs was made of wood planks. It had very tall ceilings for hay storage. It was lit by a single light bulb, which left a lot of the barn hidden in the shadows. The switch was downstairs to the barn, so the light had to be turned on before we went upstairs, to which the chores were to be done. As you go up the stairs, you have to turn left at the top to go through the door, which was open to the upstairs. There was a large knot hole in the wall on the left, and I looked through it as I was climbing up the stairs. My friend was right behind me. That was when we both heard a man's voice shout at us, "Hello!" It sounded just like my dad, and I figured it was him who had come to scare us. In spite of that, we both turned and ran screaming back to the house. My dad was in the living room watching the hockey game. It wasn't him. He then went up to check, and there was nobody in the barn.
Number 3.
A few years ago, when I was extremely pregnant, we had to have our beloved cat put to sleep. It was a devastating day for everyone involved. He was 17 years old and in very poor health, and it was the right decision, as heartbreaking as it was. When we got home, the house was in a very somber mood. After a while, I heard a crash from down the hall. I went down to see what had happened, and the 6 baby bottles that I had just bought, which were securely sitting on the table in the baby's room, had all been knocked off and scattered all over the floor. I thought this was rather peculiar, but, oh well, stuff happens sometimes. The windows were not open, so there was no breeze anywhere. Later that night, I was lying in bed trying to sleep, and all of a sudden I felt a cat jump on the bed. Then I felt the footsteps towards my pregnant body, and then a cat nestled into my side. I put my hand down to pet the cat, but there was no cat there. I was alone in the room. Goodbye, old friend.
Number 4.
I had my first baby a few years ago, a son. The odd occurrences started almost immediately when I had him. I kept a log at the time when the strangeness started, and here is an edited version of what I wrote. I bought my newborn son a plastic aquarium for the side of his crib for Christmas. It runs on batteries, and when it's turned on, it lights up, the fish float around plastic seaweed that also moves, and it makes noise. When my son was born, he really didn't like the music as much as he liked white noise or water sounds, so bubbles on a medium volume is what I left it on. My son decided that he would rather sleep in Mommy and Daddy's room rather than by himself in his crib across the hall, so that's what we did for the first 3 months. A couple weeks after we got it, the aquarium started turning on by itself when nobody was in the room. It only ever did it in the wee hours of the morning, such as 1 a.m. or 3 a.m. I will wake up to my son's room glowing blue across the hall and the bubble sounds. One time it turned itself on and off over and over again to the point that I could not count how many times it happened. I figured the toy was broken or had a wiring problem, and aside from being a bit weirded out by the toy turning itself on and off again, and being really annoyed that I was being woken up from precious sleep, I really didn't give it much more thought. The toy eventually drained the batteries, and against my better judgment, I replaced them. After this, the toy would continue to turn itself on and off. My son finally started sleeping in his crib, and this is when the toy started changing the settings I put it on. Now it plays classical music on full volume when my son is taking a nap in the crib, no matter how many times I put it back to the settings of bubbles on a medium. Okay, so it's just a broken toy, right? The batteries died again, and I didn't replace them. My son also had an electronic swing that had 6 speeds. When the swing is on, the speed that it's on lights up red. A number of times the swing has turned on when we are standing beside it, but nobody is touching it. This was weird, and maybe another one of his toys has a wiring problem. I bought my little guy an electronic book, and about a month after we got the toy, it turned itself on at 1 a.m. and started talking and singing as if somebody was playing with it. I did not get out of bed as I recognized the sounds from the toy, and the toy eventually turned itself off the way that it does to save the batteries. I thought, wow, these baby toys sure do have lousy wiring, eh? My boy loved his Jolly Jumper. I bought him a pad for the floor that makes noise when he jumps on it. It even makes noise when my son is in bed. It has gone off in the middle of the night, and it even went off when my mother and I were in the room standing next to it. I figured it was yet another wiring problem. He also has these little cars that consist of a police car, a race car, and an ambulance and a fire truck. They all sing songs and say phrases about whatever kind of vehicle it is, but they have to either be pushed on their wheels or have the button pushed in order to make them go off. Every one of those cars will go off when nobody is in the room, nobody is touching them, and they haven't moved. When one of them starts to go off, it will do that anywhere from a few songs to around an hour. He also has a flashlight that sings songs and of course lights up. The flashlight will also go off when nobody is touching it, and it keeps going for minutes to an hour. I also got him a leapfrog learning table. This toy makes lots of noise. Suddenly this toy started playing on its own. My mom was babysitting, and after my son had gone to bed, the toy started singing and wouldn't stop. My mom changed a setting on the toy, and it was silent again, until about a week later, in the morning. My son was awake and his toy was on the table, not being disturbed. All of a sudden, it started singing the alphabet. When it was done, it sang the alphabet again, and again, and again. I picked it up off the table and changed its setting like my mother had done before. The alphabet played again. Then it was silent about 10 seconds, and I thought it was going to stop, but then it played again. Then another song played after about 30 seconds of silence, and then again. This went on for 90 minutes. It stopped as suddenly as it started, and it didn't happen again that day, but it will abruptly start playing every once in a while. I bought him a Thomas the Tank Engine train that comes with a remote control to make the train move. It also talks and makes train noises. Of course, out of nowhere, it starts introducing itself, saying, "Hi there, it's Thomas." Then it goes on to compliment my navigational skills by saying, "You are a very useful engine driver," which is only something that it says when you're making it move with the wireless controller. At this point, this doesn't even surprise me anymore. I've started to expect this kind of thing with his toys. It is worth noting that my mother has an entire house full of baby toys for him to play with that sing and make noise, and not a single one of them play when nobody is playing with it. It just doesn't happen. I could see if it was one or two of his toys that do this, but almost all of them? Apart from electronics, I do have other examples of my son's friends, as I call them. He was always looking, laughing, and smiling at someone that we can't see. As he started to get older, he started pointing to nothing, whether it be in the hallway or just a blank wall in his room, like he does when he wants me to tell him what something is. He also does this with photographs, and he will point and say, "Ah!" And I will say, "That's Uncle so-and-so," or "That's Mommy's friend," whoever, and he enjoys this. But when he does it in a darkened hallway, I don't quite know what to say other than, "Mommy doesn't see anyone there." On a number of occasions, he has lifted his arms out like he wants whatever he's seeing to pick me up, the way babies do. He follows things around the room with his eyes and seems genuinely happy that whatever is there is there. One night I was sitting on the couch after my son was asleep, with his baby toys on the floor in front of me. He has another toy train that isn't electronic, and it doesn't move unless it's being pushed. His toy train lurched forward about a centimeter and made a crashing sound as it hit another toy. I'm not sure how old my son was when I started getting woken up in the middle of the night with baby cries. Now, he was a bad sleeper right from the get-go, and anyone who has had a baby knows that if your baby starts to cry, your eyes pop open immediately and you go off to feed, change, or cuddle. So it started happening where I would be asleep, wake up to the sounds of a baby crying, look at the video baby monitor that we have in our room, see my son sleeping in his crib, and be kind of baffled. I would crank up the sound on the baby monitor, and the sounds were not coming from there. When this happened, I could not get back to sleep while the crying was going on. It was simply not possible because my brain was telling me to stay awake for the sake of my baby. I would even get up and go to his room to check on him, and he was sound asleep, making no noises. I could chalk this up to a sleep-deprived new mommy, and in fact that is exactly what I was doing, until my husband started being woken up too, hearing baby cries and asking me what was wrong with our son. Of course, we can't stop the cries because our flesh and blood baby is in the next room sleeping. We didn't tell anyone about our nightly awakenings until one day my mom was babysitting by herself. When I came home, she mentioned to me that she kept hearing a baby crying and absolutely could not find the source. I told her that we heard the crying as well and just to ignore it as we were doing. The phantom cries at night did eventually stop, although I'm not completely sure when. They just sort of decreased in frequency until it stopped altogether. I felt badly for the little one who was crying, and I would help them if I could, and fortunately I didn't know where to start. Now that my son is older and talking, the toys randomly going off has completely and 100% stopped, and we have almost all of the same toys out for him to play with in his toy room. But he does get woken up in the middle of the night, about once or twice a week, saying that there's a woman in his room and she's scaring him. He says that she has black, messy hair and that she doesn't talk to him or look at him. Sometimes he says she's up by the light in his ceiling. I have no idea where to start with this problem.
Number 5.
So the other night, I gave my 4-year-old daughter her snack, brushed her teeth, and took her to bed. I read her a story, turned the lights out, gave her a kiss, and said, "I'll see you in the morning." On this particular night, a couple of hours went by, and I'm in the living room watching TV and surfing the internet, when I look up and see my daughter standing in the hallway. She's just looking at me, and I ask her what she's doing. She says, "Good night, Daddy." And I say, "Okay, good night. Go back to your bed." And she says, "I don't want to go back in there because the man is in there." Now, being a father and an adult, I know that there's no man in her room. We're on the 8th floor of an apartment, but it was the way that she said it. I believed that she believed there was a man in her room. So I took her by the hand and said, "Okay, honey, there's no man in your room." And I took her back down the hall to her bedroom. I put her back in bed, kissed her goodnight, and that's when she lost my eye contact and looked over my right shoulder, and her face was sheer terror. She was absolutely terrified by the vision she had over my right shoulder, and she started saying over and over again, "Daddy, who is that? Daddy, who is that? Daddy, 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 who is that?" Now, I don't believe there was physically somebody right behind me. I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't want to look over my shoulder because I knew that there was something behind my right shoulder. I could feel it. Every hair in my body stood up. I could feel it right to my bones. There was something behind me, and I 100% believed that she saw it and that it did not want us there. So what I decided to do was roll over beside her, cover her head with my hand, and tell her, "Don't worry, honey, there's nothing there." I calmed her down until she went to sleep. And when she fell asleep, it was still there. And it's still there now. I can feel it every time I walk into that room. I'm just glad that she doesn't see it anymore. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the show. If you have a story to share, send us an email, like us on Facebook, share, like, and subscribe.